You know what's crazy? I actually thought I had everything figured out at 30. I'm Caitlin, and honestly, most girls my age are losing their minds about being single or settling for whatever loser will propose. But I wasn't stressed. Why? Because I had Brian on backup. Yeah, we broke up 5 years ago when he moved to Dallas for work, while I stayed in Houston. But come on, that wasn't a real breakup. That was just bad timing. We were together for 4 incredible years before that stupid distance thing happened. 4 years of him treating me like a queen, paying for everything, making me feel like the center of his universe. You don't just throw that away over geography. The whole time we were apart, we stayed close. Not in a weird way, just as friends who obviously still cared about each other. He'd text me about his day, ask how I was doing, get all protective when I mentioned dating other guys. Classic signs that he wasn't over me, right? I mean, guys don't keep tabs on their exes for 5 years unless there's still something there. I kept him updated on my life too, just enough to remind him what he was missing without seeming desperate. Some cute pictures here and there, stories about my weekend plans, letting him know I was living my best life but not completely moving on. Because honestly, why would I? What Brian and I had was special. You can't just replace that kind of chemistry and history with some random person you meet on a dating app. I tried dating after we broke up, obviously. Had one semi-serious boyfriend, but that guy was such a disappointment. Always wanting to split bills, no ambition, terrible at planning anything romantic. Brian used to surprise me with weekend trips and fancy dinners without me even hinting about it. That's the difference between a real man and these boys pretending to be adults. When that relationship crashed and burned, I wasn't even upset, because I knew it just proved my point. Nobody was going to measure up to what Brian and I had together. The connection, the inside jokes, the way he used to look at me like I was the only woman in the room, you can't fake that stuff. So I kept my options open, but nothing serious. Why settle when I knew the right guy was just temporarily in the wrong city? I figured eventually the universe would work things out. Maybe he'd move back to Houston, maybe I'd end up in Dallas. The details didn't matter because when you have real love, you find a way to make it work. Plus, Brian's always been the overthinking type. He probably convinced himself we couldn't handle long distance when really, if he'd just fought harder for us, we could have figured it out. But whatever, I wasn't bitter about it. Actually, the time apart was probably good for both of us. Gave us space to grow and appreciate what we had. And I could tell he appreciated it because he was always one of the first people to view my social media posts. Always. For 5 years straight. That's not coincidence. That's a man who's still invested. When he started mentioning some new girl he was dating back in December, I wasn't even worried. Just another rebound that would fizzle out in a few weeks like all the others. But then he kept bringing her up. How she was different and really sweet. Yeah, I'd heard that song before. Still wasn't concerned because I know Brian and I know what he actually needs in a woman. Then came that Tuesday in January when everything changed. I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break, just mindlessly checking stories like I always do, when Brian's profile popped up with that rainbow ring around it. I clicked without thinking. Force of habit after 5 years of staying connected to his life. And there she was. This girl, Indy, apparently, posting from his kitchen. I recognized those granite countertops immediately, the ones he was so proud of when he first got that apartment. But this wasn't just some casual overnight thing. This girl was making breakfast like she owned the place, wearing what was obviously his shirt, tagging the location as home. Home. The nerve of this basic chick to call his place home after knowing him for what, 8 weeks? I screenshotted everything because I needed a closer look at what I was dealing with. She was pretty, I'll give her that, but in that generic Instagram way every blonde girl in America is trying to copy. Long hair, tiny waist, probably spent her whole paycheck on lip injections. The type of girl guys think they want until they realize there's nothing interesting underneath all that high-maintenance drama. And the way she was performing this whole domestic goddess act, making heart-shaped pancakes and posting quotes about finding your person. So fake, it made me nauseous. But here's what really got under my skin. Brian reposted her story to his own account. He never did that with me, not even when we were together for 4 years. I used to practically beg him to post pictures of us, and he'd act like it was this huge sacrifice. But this random girl gets the full boyfriend treatment after 5 minutes? Something was seriously wrong with this picture. I did what any normal person would do and deep dived into her profile. Public account? Naturally. Girls like her always need constant validation from strangers. Scrolling through her feed was like looking at every other wannabe influencer. Workout selfies, coffee pictures, inspirational quotes about manifesting your dreams. Basic doesn't even begin to cover it. But then I saw the posts with Brian and my stomach dropped. They looked genuinely happy together. Not that forced couple happiness you see online, but actually comfortable with each other. There were pictures from hiking trips, her meeting his friends, them cooking together in his kitchen. Since when does Brian hike? He used to complain when I wanted to take walks around the neighborhood. And cooking? I practically had to drag him to the grocery store when we lived together. But there he was, wearing an apron and grinning like an idiot while she laughed at something he said. It was like watching a stranger wear my boyfriend's face. These pictures showed a version of Brian I'd never seen. Relaxed, spontaneous, actually participating in relationship activities instead of just going along with them. How was this girl getting him to do things I couldn't get him to do in 4 years? I started commenting on his posts more, liking his pictures faster, sending him those funny memes we used to share. Just reminding him that I was still here, still part of his life, still the person who knew him better than anyone, but his responses started getting shorter and less enthusiastic. When I tried to FaceTime him like we used to do sometimes, he'd text back saying he was busy or with friends. Friends, meaning her, obviously. That's when I realized this wasn't just another fling he'd get bored with. This girl was actually becoming a real threat. I had to do something before this got completely out of hand. Brian needed to remember what real connection looked like, not some surface-level Instagram romance with a girl who probably couldn't even name his favorite movie. So I started reaching out more strategically. I'd text him about things that would bring back our good memories. That concert we went to, that amazing trip to Austin, how we used to laugh until our stomachs hurt watching stupid comedies. At first, he seemed receptive, even nostalgic. We'd text for hours about old times and I could tell he was missing what we used to have, but then he'd ruin it by mentioning her again. Indy and I tried that new sushi place downtown. Indy's never seen Breaking Bad, can you believe that? Indy this, Indy that. It was like he was trying to make me jealous on purpose, which honestly was working, but not the way he probably expected. I wasn't jealous of her. I felt sorry for her. Poor girl had no clue she was just a rebound, a distraction while Brian figured out his real feelings. Because that's obviously what this was. He was scared of the intensity of what we'd had together. So he was hiding behind this simple, uncomplicated relationship with someone who didn't challenge him or push him to grow. I decided to be the mature one and not make things weird. When he posted pictures with her, I'd like them and leave supportive comments. When he talked about her, I'd ask polite follow-up questions like I was genuinely happy for him. Kill them with kindness, right? I wasn't going to be that psycho ex-girlfriend who caused drama. I was going to show him I was evolved enough to want his happiness, even if it wasn't with me. At least not yet. But then Valentine's Day happened and I saw something that made me realize how serious this was getting. Brian had never been big on public romantic gestures. I used to have to practically force him to acknowledge Valentine's Day when we were together. He'd always say it was just a made-up holiday for greeting card companies. But there he was, posting this elaborate setup he'd created for her. Rose petals, candles, some fancy dinner he'd obviously spent hours preparing. The caption was something about celebrating the woman who brings magic to every ordinary day. I literally threw my phone across my living room. Magic? What we had was magic. This girl was just convenient, available, probably saying yes to everything he suggested because she was desperate to lock him down before he realized what a mistake he was making. That's when I knew I needed to stop playing it safe. Being the cool, supportive ex-girlfriend wasn't working fast enough. Brian needed to be reminded of what he was missing, what he'd given up when he let distance come between us. So I stepped up my social media game. Not obviously thirsty content, but definitely showing him what he was missing. Pictures from girls' nights out, looking absolutely stunning. Throwback photos from amazing trips I'd taken, showing him the exciting life I was living. And I made sure to include subtle hints about other guys showing interest. Nothing serious enough to make him think I'd moved on, but enough to plant seeds of doubt about whether I'd always be available. I also started being more direct in our conversations. Instead of just reminiscing about the past, I'd make comments about how rare our connection had been. How most people never find what we'd had together. How I'd learned so much about myself and relationships during our time apart. Just planting the idea that maybe we were both different people now, people who could actually make it work this time if we tried. His responses started getting weird though. More distant and formal, like he was pulling back instead of leaning in the way I expected. And then came the day that shattered everything I thought I knew. I was having lunch with my friend Taylor when she shoved her phone in my face with this look of pure shock. "Girl, you need to see this." Brian had posted Indy on his story, not just any casual post, but one of those relationship milestone announcements. 6 months with this incredible woman, with a picture of them looking disgustingly happy together at some fancy restaurant. 6 months. How had I completely missed that it had been 6 months? I'd been so focused on staying connected, on being part of his daily life, that I hadn't been keeping track of how much time was actually passing. 6 months wasn't a rebound anymore. 6 months meant he was getting comfortable, maybe even planning some kind of future with her. I couldn't let that happen. Not when I absolutely knew that what we'd had was deeper and more real than whatever this thing was with her. So I did something that was either brilliant or completely insane, depending on how you look at it. I sent him a long, honest message. Not desperate or crazy, just real. I told him I'd been thinking about us lately, about how good we were together, about how maybe the timing was finally right for us to try again. I mentioned how much I'd grown and changed in the past 5 years, how I understood now what had gone wrong before, and how we could fix it this time. I laid everything out there, my feelings, my hopes, my absolute certainty that we were meant to find our way back to each other, eventually. His response came 3 hours later. 3 hours of me checking my phone every 30 seconds, my heart racing every time I got a notification that wasn't from him. And when he finally replied, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. "Caitlin, I'll always care about you. But I'm with Indy now. She makes me really happy, and I want to see where this goes. I think we should take a step back from talking so much. It's not fair to her, and honestly, it's not fair to you either." Not fair to her? What about what was fair to me? What about 5 years of friendship and support and being there for him when nobody else understood him? What about the 4 years we'd spent building something real together before geography got in the way? But fine. If that's how he wanted to handle things, I could be mature about it. I didn't respond right away because I wasn't going to seem desperate or needy. I waited 2 full days and then sent back something cool and understanding. "Of course, I want you to be happy. Take care of yourself. See? I could be the bigger person here. I could give him the space he thought he needed to figure out that this girl wasn't actually right for him. Except, giving him space was absolute torture. For the first time in 5 years, I couldn't just text him when something funny happened, or when something reminded me of our time together. I couldn't see what he was up to through social media because he'd basically stopped posting anything personal. And when he did post, it was always with her. Always looking like they were living this perfect life that should have been mine. It got so bad that I started obsessively checking her profile instead of his. Trying to find cracks in the facade, reasons why she wasn't actually right for him, that he was too blinded by whatever spell she'd cast to see. She posted these annoying motivational quotes every single morning, like she was some kind of life coach, instead of just another basic girl with a social media addiction. She took pictures of literally every meal, like food photography was her calling in life. She did these workout videos in sports bras that barely covered anything, clearly just fishing for attention from other guys, even though she supposedly had a boyfriend. How could Brian not see how desperate and fake she was being? The worst part was seeing how she'd slowly infiltrated every aspect of his life that used to include me. She started showing up in group photos with his friends. People who used to be our friends before the move. She was at birthday parties and game nights, weekend trips to the lake house his buddy owns, events that I would have been at if we were still together. She was systematically replacing me in his entire social circle, and nobody seemed to think that was strange. I watched through other people's social media as she became part of traditions that Brian and I had started together. The annual crawfish boil at his friend's house, the fantasy football draft party, even that stupid white elephant gift exchange his office does every year that I used to help him pick presents for. Now she was there doing all the things I used to do, playing the role I used to play, and everyone was just accepting it like she belonged there. Then I saw something that made my blood boil. A picture from his coworker's wedding, Brian in a navy suit, looking absolutely gorgeous, and her in this stunning burgundy dress that probably cost more than my car payment. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, like the perfect couple that everyone wishes they could be. And Brian was looking at her with this expression I'd never seen before. Not the way he used to look at me, which was great, but this was different. More intense, more certain, like he'd found something he didn't even know he was looking for. That's when I realized talking wasn't going to be enough. Being patient wasn't going to work. If I wanted Brian to remember what we had together, I needed to remind him in person. Face to face, away from her influence and all the digital noise. So I made a decision that changed everything. I called in sick to work on a Friday, drove the 3.5 hours to Dallas, and showed up at that coffee shop he'd always talked about. The one with the breakfast burritos he'd said I had to try if I ever visited. I wasn't being stalky, I was being spontaneous. Romantic, even. The kind of grand gesture that shows someone how much they mean to you. I spotted him at a corner table, working on his laptop like he always used to do on weekend mornings. He looked good, better than good, actually. Relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. When he looked up and saw me standing there, the expression on his face went through about 10 different emotions in 5 seconds. Shock, confusion, something that might have been happiness, then concern. "Caitlin, what are you doing here?" I gave him my best surprised smile. "Brian, oh my God, what are the odds? I'm here visiting a friend and decided to try this place you always talked about." Not technically a lie, I was visiting him, right? And I had decided to try the place he'd mentioned. We hugged, and for a second, it felt like coming home. He invited me to sit down, asked about my drive, seemed genuinely interested in what brought me to town. I gave him this whole story about considering a job opportunity in Dallas, wanting to scope out the city before making any big decisions. Again, not completely untrue. I was always open to new opportunities. We talked for almost 2 hours, just like old times. He told me about his work, his new apartment, how much he loved living in Dallas. I shared stories about mutual friends back in Houston, funny things that had happened at work, updates on my family. It felt so natural, so right. Like we were picking up exactly where we'd left off 5 years ago. But then his phone buzzed, and I saw her name on the screen. The shift in his energy was immediate and obvious. He got that look guys get when they remember they have somewhere else to be. "I should probably head out," he said, glancing at his phone again. "I'm supposed to meet Indy for lunch." There it was, her name hanging in the air between us like a wall. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "This was really nice, though. I missed talking to you." And I could see it in his eyes. He'd missed it too. The easy conversation, the shared history, the way we could talk for hours without running out of things to say. He hesitated at the door, like he wanted to say something else, but then just gave me another quick hug. "Text me if you need any Dallas recommendations while you're in town," he said, which was basically an invitation to keep in touch, right? That night, I texted him, thanking him for the coffee recommendation and asking about a few other places to check out. He responded within minutes with a whole list of suggestions, even offering to show me around if I had time before heading back to Houston. So I did what any rational person would do. I extended my Dallas trip. Told my boss I was having car trouble and needed an extra day to get things sorted out. What was one more day when I was finally making progress? We met up the next evening for drinks at this rooftop bar he'd suggested. He seemed more relaxed this time, more like himself. We talked about everything: work, friends, funny memories from when we were together. He even admitted that he sometimes missed our long phone conversations and inside jokes. The conversation flowed so easily that I almost forgot about her entirely. Until he mentioned that he needed to leave early because he and Indy had plans to watch some movies she'd been wanting to see. But even then, I could tell he didn't really want to go. Who chooses watching a movie with their girlfriend over having deep conversations with someone who actually understands them? The next morning I suggested breakfast before I headed back to Houston. One last meal together, for old time's sake. He agreed, said he knew the perfect place. Over pancakes and coffee, with a couple mimosas making me brave, I finally said what I'd been thinking all weekend. I told him how good it felt being around him again, how rare what we'd had was, how I'd learned so much about myself and what I wanted during our time apart. I said maybe the timing was finally right for us to try again. Maybe this was the universe giving us another chance to get it right. He went completely quiet, just stared at his plate for what felt like forever, processing what I'd said. When he finally looked up, his expression was different. Sad, maybe? Disappointed? "Caitlin," he started, and I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "I love having you back in my life as a friend, but I'm with Indy. I'm really happy with her. What we had was great, but that's in the past." The rejection stung, but what he said next completely destroyed me. "Actually, I should probably tell you, we're talking about moving in together. I'm going to ask her this week." Moving in together. While I was in Dallas thinking we were reconnecting, he was planning his future with her. Making decisions that would take him even further away from any possibility of us getting back together. I managed to keep it together through the rest of breakfast, even congratulated him and said I was happy for them both. But inside, I was falling apart. How could he not see what was right in front of him? How could he choose someone he'd known for 6 months over someone who'd known him for a decade? The drive back to Houston was the longest 3.5 hours of my life. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed, moments where I could have said something different. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not at myself, but at him, at her, at the whole impossible situation. I'd put myself out there, been vulnerable and honest about my feelings, traveled hours to see him, and for what? So he could throw our friendship away for some basic girl who probably didn't even appreciate what she had? Fine. If that's how Brian wanted to handle things, then I was done trying. Done being the understanding ex-girlfriend who supported his questionable life choices. If he wanted to waste his potential on someone who wasn't right for him, that was his loss. Not mine. I deleted his number that night, unfollowed him on all social media, and decided to focus on my own life for once. Let him figure out on his own what a huge mistake he was making. Some people have to learn things the hard way, and apparently Brian was one of them. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that they'd gotten engaged. Engaged. After less than a year together. It just proved everything I'd always known about her. She was desperate to lock him down before he came to his senses. And Brian, being the overthinking pushover he'd always been, probably just went along with it because it was easier than admitting he'd made a mistake. But whatever. I'd moved on by then, started dating again, met some interesting guys, focused on advancing my career. I wasn't sitting around waiting for Brian to realize what he'd lost anymore. Though I have to admit, every once in a while I still wonder what would have happened if the timing had been different. If I'd said the right thing that weekend in Dallas. If she hadn't been in the picture complicating everything. But that's life, right? Sometimes things just don't work out the way they're supposed to, no matter how perfect they seemed at the time.